This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovators Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Well, welcome to Killer Innovations. We are here in the mobile studio at the Consumer Electronics Show 2020 here in Las Vegas. We've had a number of guests on the show this week. We typically do, 8, 10, 12 shows every season. And a lot of it is, startup companies with really interesting, little novel technologies to well-established companies who are doing some interesting work in the innovation space. This guest for this show is one that is not one you would normally expect to see at the Consumer Electronics Show. And I've noticed this year there's a number of agencies, government agencies that have been that are attending. In fact, Wednesday morning I hosted a breakfast with Chairman Ajit Pai, Chairman of the FCC. I've known Ajit for many, many years. I was asked to host and interview him for a breakfast on Wednesday morning here at Consumer Electronics Show. And then I saw that the Department of Energy was here and was actually presented. And there was some articles written about it in the show magazine here at the show. So we actually have Dimitri, who's now, what is your official title? I refer to you as CTO or.
I'm officially a Deputy Undersecretary for Artificial Intelligence and Technology at the Department of Energy.
Okay, yeah. Can't have a simple title.
No,
Right.
they're just words strung together.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Don't overthink that, please.
Yeah, well, we had on the show here not too long ago Assistant Secretary Gertz from the U.S. Navy, and he oversees naval R&D and acquisition. So I'm like, so you're the guy that buys combat boots, right? And he goes, yeah, and I also buy aircraft carriers and submarines. But the government is actually, by engaging with Chairman Pai, the work that we've been doing some work with the U.S. Marine Corps and Navy. We've had them on the show. Cable Labs, where I'm the CEO, we actually have a project with the Department of Energy. We've actually got 2 activities with the Department of Energy. Power reduction on consumer devices, CPE gear in the home is one program. And then the Grid Metrics project of how do we track, report, share power status data that our network is dependent on. Because we don't have electricity, you don't have broadband, kind of a critical resource.
Yep.
So talk a little bit about, introduce yourself, but also introduce, why is the Department of Energy at the Consumer Electronics Show?
First, thanks for having me. It's great to be batting cleanup in your lineup this week. So it's been a pretty remarkable show. And you should be asking, what is DOE here doing? What do you have for us this year? DOE is at its core a technology innovator. And we have to be, from our roots in the Manhattan Project to sequencing the human genome, to enabling fracking, which has led to a lot of oil independence for this nation. We live at the forefront of solving hard problems that we have to do, and drawing the best of pushing the frontiers of science and technology to find the solutions that we can put in place to solve those problems. These are problems that you care about. If we didn't do our job, you would know. If we're doing our job, no one pays attention to us. But you should be wondering, every day, what are we up to? What kinds of things are we thinking about, and where are we headed?
Well, it's an interesting point because people typically think of Department of Energy. Okay, they don't even probably
don't think about it.
Well, they don't, right? You don't think about it until you don't have electricity, right? Or you don't have, or fuel costs, get so out of whack, or we have a foreign dependency like on oil or whatever the case might be. But the history though of things like the Manhattan Project or the Tennessee Valley Authority and hydroelectric and the independence that's given us, or the atomic, nuclear power plant industry, and in the United States, it's one of those things where you don't think about it until you miss it, and then when you miss it, you're mad.
Yeah.
Well, but what I find interesting, though, now that I've spent a little bit amount of time with the team up at NREL, which is the National Renewable Energy Lab for the DOE.
One of our 17. So we got 17 of those labs.
Right. Well, I got the name right. I get extra credit points for that. Yeah. Right. But there's the obvious things you think of Department of Energy, and then there's the non-obvious. You're doing things that are like, okay, why is the DOE thinking about healthcare or massive amount, dealing with massive amount of data from X-rays or MRIs? And,
we've been in the health business again since the Manhattan Project. One of our initial funding missions was in health as it tied to radiation,
right?
Which led us into genomics and genetics to try and understand radiation damage and what it did to people and animals and food and so on. You had to understand it at the cellular level, and we pushed the technologies to understand it. So we've been rooted in health for 70 years.
Right, but people don't even realize that.
No, they don't. Today you go out and do 23andMe or you're doing a DNA sequencing for a crime lab or something. You don't realize that came from DOE.
Right.
Right. And it wasn't that we had a medical innovation. The things we do well is we understand all the kinds of technologies that come under the hood. So with sequencing the genome, it was outside of medicine. It was progress in lasers, in robotics, dye tagging, in automation, in computing, and it was a recognition in the mid-'80s that if we brought all these things together, we could advance the sequencing of the human genome. And it took years to convince others that we had to do this. And eventually it became a thing and it was done. And today it's every day you can go to Best Buy and get your DNA kit.
Right.
And it's a massive economy that came from a technology convergence that we pulled together and pushed forward. And we do things like that. We look at these hard problems that we're facing, and we look at all the kinds of things that are evolving in the technology space, and you realize we bring all these things together in new ways. We can do things that no one else thought could be possible. And so we live in that space. And it's not just energy. We're a part of the intelligence community.
Right.
We have cybersecurity responsibilities. Aside from keeping the lights on and owning kind of 10% of the grid, we own the responsibility for keeping energy alive in this country, which is a pretty big responsibility. We've got salt domes in the Gulf Coast with 700 million barrels of oil. And, after Hurricane Harvey, we released 100 million barrels of oil because refineries were offline. But that was us and what we bring to, kind of the fuel that we think we should have and when to release it and so on. And it kept country working seamlessly.
Yep.
We do things, we're the biggest funders of science in this country, of physical sciences, because we have to solve some of these problems scientifically before we can draw them into the problems.
Well, that brings up an interesting point because I think, or at least our experience with my work where I'm CEO is the DOE's real emphasis and focus on that public-private partnerships.
Yeah, has to be partnership.
Because there are some others who probably aren't quite as open to public-private partnerships. I'm not talking about other U.S. government agencies, but we're in 36 countries, right? So I deal with policy and regulatory all over the world type of thing, and some of them have different approaches. But I can tell you from our work with both on the voluntary agreement that we manage on behalf of the ISP industry or the NREL grid metrics projects, the openness for that public-private partnership it's refreshing. It's absolutely refreshing. Meaning that everybody brings their expertise, but we're all trying to solve the same problem. Let's figure out the best
openness
way.
is important. We have national labs because we realize we can't do everything. The private sector isn't doing everything we want. There are places where we've got to push things where there's no real market pull, but we need it. And to the extent we can find private sector partners who are willing to deviate a bit from their technology roadmaps, we support that, and we fund non-recoverable engineering costs and other kinds of sources of money for them to develop the R&D within their home, businesses that we can then take.
Right.
And our hope is that they can derive value from that. So we leverage whatever's available. And so the show like this is fantastic to see all the kinds of things that are bubbling up there. But ultimately, our problems are a bit harder, and that's the problem.
Right, but I think your point about being able to connect the dots. I can take that robotic piece. I can bring some AI, machine learning to it. I can bring some chemistry to it, and I can go solve a problem that that the Department of Energy has identified. We're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation talking about Department of Energy and why CES. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Killer Innovation Show on the BizTalk Radio Network. So, welcome back. We were talking, we went to break around why CES. So, you've been able to have a chance, you and the team from Department of Energy. So, what are you looking for when you come to a show like this? Is it just do a quick scan? Or do you come in with a plan to target? Or how do you think about that?
It's a mix of things. Back in our roots, the technology world was easier. You could fund a program and you could own everything in it, from developing the science, the technology, and delivering a product, and you could put it all in one place, put a guy at the top and say, run that and deliver it. And today you can't do that. When you look at AI today, in whatever definition you want, because it's a bit squishy, to say the least, touches everyone. Everyone is doing something, and the innovation is global, and it's in small companies and big companies. It's in academia. It's almost anywhere you look, and so there's no way to really box it in. And you have to understand that all the ideas are out there somewhere.
Right.
And so looking around to see what people are thinking is pretty important. Then you know where to drill down. Where's the innovation happening? What are the best ideas? What can we draw from? Who should we be talking to?
Right. Well, at least here, like a show like Consumer Electronics Show, we've talked about it multiple times this week with other guests. I would argue sometimes the overhype of AI. Right. I jokingly refer to the other night we were at a event called Showstoppers. It's for journalists. And I was jokingly pointing to the bartender pouring a drink out of a can of Coke, saying, well, that's AI because it's being intelligently poured into a cup and it's hitting the cup, right? Because here, everybody is just punching the term AI onto everything.
It's business. We got that.
Right? Now, at my day job at Cable Labs, we have Dr. Bernardo Huberman, who used to be at Stanford. He now runs our AI research program. And Bernardo, gets bristly when people get loose with the term, right, of what is AI. And our focus is primarily in machine learning at Cable Labs in our day job. And given your focus on AI, how do you bucketize AI as far as getting out of the squishiness to make it a little more make it a little more real?
We're pretty open in terms of what AI means to us, because I think it is such early days in this field. Now that everyone has data and technology available to them, the tools you're going to draw from to actually find answers or solve problems are up to the individual. And you see people drawing tools from the 50s and the 60s and the 80s and from last week. And you put all those together because that's what it takes to solve your problem. So what's in AI, time will tell. And it'll depend on whether you're in healthcare or working in the financial sector or in the national security world.
Right.
And so we're pretty open. And so we look at more on the kinds of problems we're trying to solve, and we're pretty open in terms of what does it take to get there.
Right. Well, and there's been this hot topic here at the show and in the press and all that around AI and ethics,
Mm-hmm.
right? Elon Musk was funding a bunch of AI work, and then Elon kind of backpedaled out because he was like, I'm not sure I want to fund something that I can't. You can get some kind of constraint around it to make sure it doesn't do any harm, right? And there's been this, a couple of examples where people doing machine learning, but the learning data set was biased because of the people selected on the learning data set. And so how do you think about those kinds of contexts? Because in the case of government agency, it's got to be pretty hypersensitive to.
Yeah, it's not just ethics; it's privacy. It can touch civil rights. It can touch a variety of things in ways that can be subtle. And I think one of the challenges for us is when we were doing things in big data before, even conventional computing and just computer simulation. The kinds of people you drew on to create your core team to deliver something were technical people. You had engineers and computer people and architects, and you got them to program and deliver something. But now you have to start thinking about problems that have been outside that domain.
Mm-hmm.
You have to bring in not necessarily lawyers, but people who understand ethics and the subtleties. Because, as you aggregate data, you learn things in ways that can be surprising.
Mm-hmm.
It is hard to foresee.
Correct.
Medical community has IRBs, these independent review boards. They say, I want to look at this data. They want to say, well, why? What are you going to do with it? Which data? Walk us through. And they evaluate whether it is the right use of that. It might be that we need some kind of parallel in this space. And it is a new world for us in the technology space to think about. Who do you bring in and how do you develop those teams so that what you're delivering makes sense?
Well, I think the hard part is there's been all these studies around, bias, unintended or intended, right? So things like, confirmation bias, you already kind of have your conclusion determined and, not consciously, but just out of human nature, you just...
Who owns that problem? Is it the guy writing the code? Is it the guy who gathers the data, which is just data? It's one of these meta problems that sits above it all, and you have to understand the context of it somehow that could surface in subtle ways, and no one actually owns it is the problem.
Well, the problem is, I think today everybody says, okay, ethics is a problem, but you don't have anybody like raising their hand going, let's put some guardrails here. Up, right? Type of thing. Because we have the same issue in in the R&D innovation lab I run. Dealing with I've got data coming from 65 of the largest ISPs in the world, providing every transaction that goes across their network. Right. Well, what do the confidentiality of that data is absolutely paramount because that's personal and private. We are. I would call it almost over paranoid on that data to make sure nothing happens to it. It's not touched or manipulated. But I think there's the guardrail piece. I think is and everybody's looking for somebody to kind of say particularly when it comes to the AI because you see so much potential. This thing could really reveal reveal insight that you just don't have the ability to get to that any other way.
More and more than you know, right? With 5G coming, with much more bandwidth. With everything passing machine-to-machine communication,
right?
What's being gathered and what it means when you overlay different data is going to surprise us. It's
right.
Like, whoa, I didn't know you could tell that. Like your tornado story in the Dakotas.
In Sioux Falls.
It will surprise us in that way.
Yep. So we're going to take another quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation, talking about the Consumer Electronics Show and what the Department of Energy is working on. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Killer Innovation Show on the BizTalk Radio Network. So, Dimitri, we were talking at the break, about ethics, but let's back up a little bit and talk specifically around, AI is in your title, which either I congratulate you or I pity you, right?
I'll let you know.
Yeah, let me know how that works out for you. That's what I have. One of the pieces of advice I give to the listeners of the show is if you're the innovation guy at whatever company you're at, do not put the word innovation in your title because it never works out. Because everybody assumes, okay, I don't have to think about it because it's in your title.
That's right. What have you done to us,
Right.
for us today?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about what do you see as the role of AI in the work that you're doing at the Department of Energy? How have you been putting together your efforts and some of those activities?
There's been a big alignment in Washington on recognizing the importance of AI over the last couple of years. It kind of built up this year with the president signing the executive order that kind of back in February to bring all the agencies together to think nationally about the importance of this. Within the Department of Energy, Secretary Perry launched our new Artificial Intelligence and Technology Office, AITO. That's what we're doing here at CES. It's our first footprint of the new office, and it's meant to capture all of the breadth of things that have been going on at DOE and bring some top-down cohesion to the activities. We did an inventory of things that are going on at our national labs. We have a workforce of 90+ thousand people, 17 labs, and many other sites. Everyone's doing something somewhere. Everyone is stuck with too much data, too much information, and having to make decisions. But what we have the luck is the ability to develop new technologies and try and attack some. And so we have literally hundreds of projects, I think more than 600 so far that we've surfaced, doing just about anything you could imagine. Pushing technology from seismic understanding, certainly in the nuclear weapons world, cybersecurity, smart grid, smart cities, transportation. We're even working on farms where we're doing stuff in traumatic brain injury and cancer research. It touches a lot of things. At the core, it's the same kind of learning and technology and AI cross-cutting fabric, but it's applied to many different areas in partnerships with the private sector, with other agencies, with philanthropy now, with many who recognize that partnering will really help advance this.
Yeah, well, it is interesting. Even with us building up, our AI team has been in place for 2 years at Cable Labs, and just some of the early work, you're uncovering the non-obvious.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're overflowing with all this data. How do you jump into the deep end and try to wade your way through to extract actionable data versus just volume of data?
We worry about actionable, and part of the problem is our mission is a bit different than others. Even in the private sector, we worry about bad things happening. We worry about rare events, catastrophic events, shutting down of the grid, nuclear accidents, and those are things that you will never measure. So if you were Uber and you went out to your driving facility, you can hit things and mannequins and fake buses and drive around and train and retrain on all the bad things that you worry about. For us, we can measure everything we want except the bad things that we worry about.
Well, you sure hope you never get a chance to measure.
Yeah, we hope we will never have that data set, but we nevertheless have to make decisions about those things from the data we can gather. And so we worry about what is actionable if you know you're not actually measuring what you worry about.
Right.
And that's an interesting world to be in, and that's a place where the technologies, the tools, the learning, none of that exists. And that's where we're learning. And so we partner with others. We do all kinds of AI to try and push that frontier to understand when you can make decisions that are significant, that are high leverage, high consequence, when you have the kinds of data that we have.
So, in an organization as big as the Department of Energy, because like when I was at HP, we were 240,000 employees across 158 countries. And like with the president and Secretary Perry trying to bring alignment, as you said, 600 projects, how do you, that's like massive, right? And you either don't have a lot of efficiency because you get a lot of small things, or you flip the other direction and you try to bring it all together, and then it just slows it all down, right? You don't want to be that constraining factor. So what's been the process? What's been the lessons learned of how do you bring that together to get better leverage?
Yeah. So first is who's, knowing who's doing what. Like you said, with 240,000 people, you were probably wondering, well, who's actually doing what? What are my assets? What are my skills? What am I really good at?
Right.
Our workforce is not quite as big. We certainly measure ROI in a different way.
Right.
But it's a similar kind of challenge. So in doing this assessment of what's going on, we have a sense of who is doing what and what the nascent capabilities are in many different areas. Who's worried about adversarial AI? Who's thinking about sparse data? What are they applying it to? We can start to pick and choose where the skills are, so we know that as we develop the hard problems we're trying to solve, who do we draw from? And so we encourage the bottoms up, ecosystem of people pushing AI within their domains. DOE is good. Ultimately, we are a team science enterprise. We draw people together, many skill sets, put them on problems, and we can put them on as long as it's needed to solve the problem. And so knowing what you can draw from is pretty important.
Well, that's it. Knowing your assets of expertise and tool sets. Like we were sharing before we started the show, I had a chance to go up and visit and spend a full day with the NREL team. And they took me into the VR lab to show fluid dynamic flows coming off of the NREL supercomputer, Peregrine, developed at HP.
Thank you.
What's that?
Thank you.
Yep. I got to see a product that started underneath me, but shipped many years later. But what was interesting was talking with that team that developed that model, showing wind turbines and having the wind flow, being disrupted by the turbine blades, impacting efficiency of the turbines behind it. And you were losing efficiency in these wind farms. And I was talking with the team, and it was more about the aha moment. Like, we knew we were challenged. We just could never understand it. But once we could take that data, apply the AI, visualize it, then we can all go, aha, now I've at least got a tool set to know how I would do something differently.
Well, you touch on also a unique asset of DOE. We do computer simulation that is the most complex than anything else in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It is driven by nuclear missions, but we adapt it to many other problems. So we can create, we have the world's fastest supercomputers. They also have the most GPUs, so we can do remarkable AI problems too. But if you think about the simulation, we can simulate very realistic situations. We can create numerical data to add to additional data that might be derived from the grid, from wherever you want, from weather, from subsurface, and we can create bigger data sets that include things that you couldn't measure.
Right.
And you could try learning from that as well. And so our ability to handle data, both created and measured, I think is pretty much unmatched by anywhere else.
Yeah, well, I have to say, they had in their VR environment is based on the cave, right? So if those of us, University of Illinois got a cave, UC San Diego's got their cave, right?
They were novel 10 years ago.
Yeah, a lot of people have got it. But I have to say, it was more about the data and the ability to walk through that data and see it. So it's not just I've got lots of data and AI tells me, that you should make decision A. It's the human in the loops being able to visualize it and apply the human ingenuity to the data set to make better decisions.
The interface of the data was tricky.
Was very impressive. I mean, very, very impressive. Very smart team. So we're going to take another short commercial break. When we come back, what I'd like to talk about is, talking about organizations that are trying to embrace AI, given your expertise on the AI side, and what advice you would give them, right? Because and also the public-private partnerships. If people have got ideas, what's the best way they can engage with the Department of Energy to become part of contributing solutions? So with that, we'll cover that when we get back after this quick commercial break. We'll be right back. So, Dimitri, as we were going to the commercial break, one of the questions I wanted to ask you here is, you've got a lot of deep expertise in AI. AI is everywhere, but a lot of organizations aren't quite sure, how to think about AI from just their day to day. Do you have any advice given your expertise? Because you're inside of a lab, but I think the expertise applies to all kinds of organizations around how organizations should think about AI, how should they get started, those types of things.
So I think not to overthink it. First, AI today is pretty fragile. It isn't Skynet.
Right.
It's not going off to do something on its own. And so it can do things, but it can do limited things today. So we have kind of this big sci-fi, aspirational sense of what it might be or could be behind the curtain. It's not that. Maybe someday, I don't know, but not in the near future. And so it's a means to think about, reverse engineering knowledge from data.
Mm-hmm.
You have all of this stuff. If you're in a place in your job, in your enterprise, where you're just buried in information. I've got it on my email. My work email has more than 30,000 unopened email. And I've simply given up. And my private ones have equally as many. And we're all buried in things coming in with 5G, with smarter systems. There's going to be a lot more stuff coming at us. But in your job, if you're buried in things, the place to start is, well, if I could understand this, would the job be better? Could I be more effective? Could we be institutionally better? And that's a place to start.
Right.
And so you start with the problem. The answer isn't, where do I plug in AI? The question is, what are the problems you're trying to solve? And are there AI methods that could be drawn in to help? But not to plunge into AI and say, I've got to be doing AI,
Right.
Because it might not help you.
Yes.
In the way you think. And so identify what's important to you and where you can do things better. I think that the funnest thing I like about this moment in time with AI is it lets us step back and look fresh at all the problems that we've been faced with personally, in society, big, small, and say, well, maybe I can take a fresh look at this.
Yep.
And it gives us a time to reset all of our thinking against all the stuff we've just given up on and said, this is too hard. Because now there's a moment in time that maybe we can solve some of these. And so find those. And then you have to recognize the expertise is out there somewhere, and you have to find it. A lot of people will come into our office and they say, we've got the answer for you. And as we dissect it, say, no, you really don't. And so there's a lot of hype and things that are kind of misidentified in terms of what they can do, but there's also a lot of really great innovation out there. And you just have to figure your way through it, but don't, beware of what people bring to you.
Right. And I like your point about, don't overthink it. We talked earlier in the show about public-private partnerships and how important that is for the Department of Energy to achieve its mission objective. So, and there's companies out there that are, plugged into how to work with different agencies, but there's a lot of innovators that as soon as you start talking about working with the government, they take two steps back. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to get caught in the bear hug and get crushed in the process here. So if there's companies out there that think they might have something that's really interesting, or, I know for at least my experience with the Department of Energy is, you put out some really well-written, well-informed, requests for help around specific problem spaces. But I think a lot of people don't even know where to look. Right? How do you understand what the DOE is even looking for, where an innovator might have some contribution to make?
It's easy to find us. We're located right across from the Smithsonian Castle, right in the middle of the mall, downtown D.C., 1,000 Independence. People come by and talk to us. The door is open. We have companies coming by all the time saying, this is what we're doing. We listen to them. We talk with them to the extent that there are places where we can facilitate connections. We make those, but the door is open as well as at our laboratories.
Right.
So I think there's there's plenty of opportunity.
Right.
You can find us. You can shoot us emails, or stop by.
Well, and you guys do. You do. I'm assuming because I have not engaged with the Department of Energy on this. We do some work with the U.S. Marine Corps about SBIR grants, right?
Yep.
So you do SBIR.
We have an SBIR office. So
right. Small business innovation research.
Yep.
So,
I'm sorry. Yeah.
And then you have your CREDAs, your cooperative R&Ds.
Yep.
I did a CREDA back many years ago with Oak Ridge. So that was my one experience on a CREDA.
There are a lot
of
leverage points with the department. I guess it is sometimes hard to see all of these.
Well, that's the hard part for innovative companies that are doing some interesting areas that haven't looked at potentially engaging. But one of the things I would encourage listeners who are doing some really innovative work is a public-private partnership where you can solve a government problem, which helps you then advance your own products, is a great partnership result on the other side. But it's a win-win for everybody involved.
No, it's an important tool for us.
Right.
And our office, AITO, is the entry point. It was the vision of Secretary Perry and now of Secretary Bruyette at the department, that this is kind of the entry point of AI into the department. But then it fans out. We don't own all of this.
Right.
We are there to make things happen. We're there to push the envelope. We're there to help coordinate. We're there to develop as well. But come talk to us.
Perfect. What we will do is up on the show notes, we will put links in so you can get pointed to the right direction and do a little bit of research on the program and the office. And I would encourage you, if you're working on an interesting innovation area that you think might apply, whether it's Department of Energy or any of the other agencies, don't be shy. Particularly things like SBIR grants or cooperative R&D agreements are great mechanisms for companies to work with a customer, solve a specific problem, and advance their own program. So, hey, Dimitri, thank you for taking the time. I know it's crazy.
No,
here
this has been great.
So I appreciate your time. We're going to wrap up today's show. We will be back next week. The one ask I have is if you like the show and you find the shows interesting, just tell one of your friends. Help us spread the word. And with that, we will talk with you next week. Bye-bye.